Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was a detective in a noir-style world. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The rain in Muzdalifa didn't wash anything clean. It was a liar. It fell in slick, oily sheets, clinging to the grimy windows and carrying the city's exhaust fumes down to the cracked pavement. From my second-story window, it turned the neon signs across the street into bleeding watercolors, a garish, weeping mural for a city that had long forgotten how to cry for itself. Kaminari's electric noodle bar. The sign flickered, its yellow lightning bolt buzzing like a dying insect. Below it, the hiss of the ramen stall's vents mingled with the steady drumming on my fire escape, a rhythm section for the city's mournful, never-ending blues tune. My office, if you could call it that, smelled of three things: the cheap, burnt coffee I ran my life on, the damp wool of my perpetually damp trench coat, and the faint, savory scent of pork broth wafting up through the floorboards. It was a scent that promised a warmth and satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. The sign on my door, the one with the peeling gold leaf letters, read I. Midoriya. Private Investigations. Below that, a smaller, hand-painted addendum. Deku. Some men carried a lucky coin. I carried that name. A relic from a childhood spent dreaming of primary colors and impossible smiles, twisted into a playground slur by a boy with explosions in his palms. Deku. Useless. In a world defined by what you could do, lift a car, turn to steel, read a mind, I was defined by what I couldn't. I was a null set. An empty space. For a while, it had been a brand seared onto my soul. Now, it was just a name on the door. It kept me honest. It reminded me that in a metropolis built by gods and monsters, I was just a man. And a man had to be smart to survive. The coffee maker on the corner of my desk gave a final, gurgling sigh and spat a stream of black sludge into the pot. It was a third-hand Cork Brew 5000, a piece of junk whose advertised self-heating element had died a decade ago. Now it just brewed coffee the old-fashioned way, slow, loud, and bitter. Just like me. I poured a cup into a chipped ceramic mug that said "World's Greatest Hero," the irony so thick I could taste it over the coffee. It was a gag gift from the only other person in this city who knew the joke. I sat back in my chair, the worn leather groaning in protest. My desk was an archipelago of half-finished case files. A cheating husband with a minor elasticity quirk who wasn't clever enough to hide the out-of-state motel receipts. A missing cat with a teleportation quirk that only worked when it was scared, leading to a 3-day chase through the city's sewer system. Small-time grief for small-time people. It paid the rent. Barely. The real money, the real power, pulsed in the gleaming spires that pierced the perpetual cloud-covered downtown. The Endeavor Tower, the Detonarat Spire, the Yayorozu Holdings building. They were the homes of the new gods, the corporate titans whose quirks weren't just powers, they were assets, weapons, empires. Down here in the gutter, we dealt with the runoff. My gaze drifted to the locked filing cabinet in the corner. It didn't hold client information. It held my ghosts. Notebooks, filled with the cramped, frantic scrawl of a boy who believed analysis could be a superpower. Hero analysis for the future. That's what they were called. Detailed breakdowns of every pro-hero's quirk, their strengths, their weaknesses, their fighting styles. I'd thought. I'd hoped it would be enough. That a mind could stand beside might. It couldn't. Now those same notebooks were filled with different kinds of analysis. The patterns of criminal organizations. The tells of a lying client. The structural weaknesses of a corrupt system. The heroes were still in there. But now they were filed under sections like potential obstructions, PR liabilities, and known affiliates of a corrupt police commissioner. The dream hadn't died. It had just grown up, put on a cheap suit, and learned to be cynical. A sharp buzz from the intercom on my desk jolted me. I leaned forward, pressing the button. Yeah, Deku? It's Sato from the bakery, a gruff voice crackled through the speaker. You still working on finding who's been lifting my sugar shipments? I took a long sip of coffee. The case was 3 weeks old. A petty thief with a minor levitation quirk was siphoning a few pounds of sugar off the top of delivery pallets. Making progress, Sato-san. The culprit is clever. Leaves no traces. A lie. I'd figured it out in the first 2 days. It was a couple of kids from the shelter down the block, using the sugar to bake cookies to sell for pocket money. I'd confronted them, made them promise to stop, and bought a dozen of their oatmeal raisin cookies. They were pretty good. Well, hurry it up, Sato grumbled. My profits are taking a hit. You'll have a full report by the end of the week, I said, my voice as flat as the rain-slicked street outside. I let go of the button, cutting the connection. I'd pay Sato for the stolen sugar out of my own pocket. It was easier than turning in a couple of kids trying to survive. It was the kind of math that kept me poor and let me sleep at night. Most nights, I turned back to the window, watching a sleek, black limousine with tinted windows glide through the street below. The water on the pavement parted for it like a congregation for a priest. Quirkily money, someone important, insulated from the grime and the rain, passing through my world but never touching it. The city was full of ghosts, but the real invisible men were the ones who lived in penthouses. That's when I heard it. A sound distinct from the city's usual cacophony. Footsteps. On my stairs. They were slow, hesitant. Not the heavy, confident tread of a cop or the hurried scuffle of a process server. These were light, measured. Each step seemed to be a debate with the one before it. The wood of the old staircase creaked, a sound I knew intimately. I could map a person's weight and anxiety by the symphony of groans from those stairs. This person was carrying a heavy load, and it wasn't in their purse. I straightened up, my senses sharpening. The tired slump left my shoulders. This was the moment the job actually began. The moment before the knock. The moment when anything was still possible, before a story full of lies and half-truths spilled onto my threadbare carpet. The footsteps stopped outside my door. Silence. I counted the seconds in the drips from the leaky pipe in the corner. 1, 2, 3. A deep breath, I imagined. A gathering of courage. A soft knock. 3 precise raps. Not demanding, but not timid either. It was the knock of someone who had run out of all other options. It's open, I called out, my voice a low rumble. The door swung inward with a protesting squeak. And there she was. The textbooks of my trade, the cheap paperbacks with lurid covers, would have called her a dame. A frail. A broad. She was none of those things. She was a woman caught in the rain. Her trench coat, a size too big, was soaked through, the dark fabric clinging to her small frame. Rainwater dripped from the hem, forming a small, growing puddle on the linoleum. Her brown hair was plastered to her forehead and cheeks, and her face was pale, almost luminous in the gloomy office light. But it was her eyes that held me. They were large and brown, the color of rich earth, and they were filled with a desperate, intelligent light. They were the eyes of someone who had seen something they weren't supposed to see and was smart enough to be terrified by it. She clutched a worn leather satchel to her chest like a shield. Her knuckles were white. For a moment, she just stood there, framed in the doorway, a ghost brought in by the storm. "Mr. Midoriya?" she asked. Her voice was soft, but it carried a clear, steady tone beneath the tremor of anxiety. I gestured to the chair opposite my desk. It was just as worn as mine, but it was the only hospitality I had to offer. "That's the name on the door. Have a seat. You're letting the chill in." She closed the door behind her, the latch clicking shut with a sound of finality. She moved to the chair and sat on the edge, her posture ramrod straight, as if she were afraid to let her guard down even for a second. She didn't take off her coat. I read about you," she began, her gaze darting around the room, taking in the stacks of paper, the overflowing ashtray, the general state of managed decay. "In an article online, it said you were thorough." "Thorough is one word for it," I said, leaning back. "Expensive is another. Broke is a third. Depends on the day." I watched her hands. She twisted the strap of her satchel. "A nervous habit. What can I do for you, Miss Uraraka?" she supplied. "Ochako Uraraka." I nodded slowly. "Uraraka. And what kind of trouble is a woman like you in that you can't take it to the folks with the shiny badges and the taxpayer-funded budget?" It was my standard opening. It cut through the preamble and got right to the heart of why anyone ever walked through my door. The system had failed them. Her expression tightened. A flicker of anger in those wide, brown eyes. The police were the first people I went to. They were less than helpful. They usually are, I murmured, taking another sip of coffee. What's the problem? She took a deep breath. My father. He's missing. Missing persons. I hated missing persons cases. They were rabbit holes lined with broken promises and false hope. Most of the time, the person didn't want to be found. They were running from debts, from a bad marriage, from themselves. And if they did want to be found, it was usually because something terrible had already happened. Tell me about your father, I said, my tone shifting into professional gear. I pulled a fresh legal pad from a drawer and clicked a pen. The pen was a cheap plastic thing, but the notepad was high-quality paper. Details mattered. His name is Kenji Uraraka. He's a scientist. She said the word with a mixture of pride and fear. A research chemist. He works for Detnerat. My pen stopped moving. Detnerat. The name hung in the air between us, heavy and cold. Detnerat wasn't just another corporation. It was a titan. They specialized in quirk support technology, costumes, medical equipment, containment gear. Their public face was one of civic duty and progress, their CEO a smiling philanthropist who cut ribbons at new youth centers. Their shadow, however, was long and dark. Rumors clung to them like the damp rot in my building's walls: illegal quirk experimentation, corporate espionage, ties to organized crime. They were untouchable, wrapped in a blanket of high-priced lawyers and political connections. Detnerat, I repeated, my voice flat. That's a tall building to throw stones at, Miss Uraraka. I know, she whispered, her voice cracking for the first time. He's been gone for 3 days. He didn't come home from work on Tuesday. He didn't call. It's not like him. He's meticulous. He calls me every night at 8 o'clock. Every single night, since my mother passed. And the police? Who'd you speak to? A detective Ogawa, she said, a note of disgust in her voice. He has some kind of lie detection quirk. He said he could tell when people were being cagey. He asked me if my father had any debts, any vices, a mistress. She flinched. He took a brief statement, looked around the apartment for 5 minutes, and then told me my father probably just took an impromptu vacation. Said he'd file a report, but that adult men have the right to disappear if they want to. I grunted. I knew Ogawa. His quirk wasn't lie detection, it was emotional scent. He could smell strong emotions like fear and anger. It made him arrogant and lazy. He'd smell a wife's anxiety about her missing husband, interpret it as her hiding something, and close the case in his mind before he'd even finished his coffee. He was a symptom of the MPD's disease, an over-reliance on powers that let them skip the actual work of investigation. Did your father have any of those things? Debts? A secret life? I asked, my eyes fixed on her. No, she said, her chin jutting out with fierce certainty. My father is a good man. He's quiet, dedicated. His work was his life. And me. He lived for me. The work, I said, tapping my pen on the notepad. What exactly was he working on at Detnerat? She hesitated. The first wall. There was always a wall. It was proprietary. He couldn't talk about it in detail. High-level biochemical research. Something to do with quirk regulation. Regulation, I mused. That can mean a lot of things. Boosting, dampening, stabilizing. I don't know the specifics, she insisted, maybe a little too quickly. Just that it was important. He'd been working strange hours. He seemed stressed. Worried. Worried about what? He wouldn't say. He just told me to be careful. I let the silence stretch, the only sound the drumming of the rain and the buzz of the neon sign. I studied her. The desperation was real, that much was obvious. The fear was, too, but there was a piece of the story missing, a shape in the dark she was refusing to look at. Miss Uraraka, I said, my voice softening slightly. People who work for companies like Detnerat don't just vanish. They're valuable assets. If a man like your father went missing, the company's private security, which is better funded and more powerful than half the city's police force, would be turning this city upside down. The fact that they aren't, and the fact that the MPD is brushing you off, tells me one of two things. Either your father left on his own for reasons you don't know, or he disappeared for reasons that Detnerat and the police don't want anyone looking into. I leaned forward, my forearms resting on the cluttered desk. Either way, this is not a simple missing persons case. This is dangerous. Are you prepared for what I might find? Her gaze didn't waver. I just want to find my father. The simple, desperate plea. The one that always got me. It was the same thing I had wanted, once upon a time. A simple, impossible thing. My rates are 200 a day, plus expenses, I said, the cold, hard reality of business. I'll need a retainer for 5 days up front. 1,000 yen. It was a steep price, meant to scare off the time wasters. From the looks of her worn coat and the scuffed toes of her shoes, it was a price she couldn't afford. She didn't flinch. She reached down and opened her satchel. I expected a checkbook, maybe a wad of cash. Instead, she pulled out a thick manila envelope and a small, velvet pouch. She slid the envelope across the desk. This is everything I have, she said, her voice quiet but firm. She opened the pouch and emptied its contents onto the desk. A meager pile of folded bills and coins. I didn't need to count it to know it wasn't 1,000 yen. It was maybe a fifth of that. It's all I could pull together. But I can get more. I ignored the money. My eyes were on the envelope. I picked it up. It was heavy. Inside was a thin police report, a single page, mostly blank, with Ogawa's lazy signature at the bottom. Beneath it was a collection of papers. Photographs of her and a kind-faced, spectacled man who must be her father. Bank statements. A copy of his employment contract with Detnerat. She had come prepared. She wasn't just desperate, she was organized. This is all you have? I asked, my voice neutral. Yes. I looked from the pathetic pile of money to her unwavering, pleading eyes. I saw the dark circles of sleeplessness under them, the tension in her jaw. This wasn't a game to her. This was everything. Against every cynical instinct in my body, against the screaming protests of my landlord and my empty stomach, a different part of me took over. The small, stupid, stubborn part that still believed in finding answers in the dark. The part that hated bullies, whether they were on a playground or in a corporate tower. The part that saw a genuine cry for help and couldn't, for the life of it, turn away. I pushed the small pile of money back toward her. Keep it. You'll need it. I picked up the pen. I'll take the case. The relief that washed over her face was so profound it was like watching a dam break. The rigid posture sagged, and for a second, I thought she might cry. But she didn't. She just nodded, a deep, shuddering nod of gratitude. Thank you, she breathed. Thank you, Mr. Midoriya? Don't thank me yet, I said, my voice all business again. I slid the envelope toward me. I need one more thing. A key to his apartment. I'll need to search it. Properly this time. She nodded, fumbling in her satchel again and producing a single, silver key on a plain ring. She placed it on the desk. It looked small and insignificant, but I knew what it was. It was trust. It was the first step into the labyrinth. I stood up, and she followed suit. I'll be in touch, I said, walking her to the door. Don't talk to the police. Don't talk to anyone from Detnerat. If they contact you, you call me first. Understand? Yes, she said, pulling her coat tighter around herself. She paused at the door, her hand on the knob, and looked back at me. He has a quirk. My father. It's called zero gravity. Just like mine. He can make any object he touches weightless for a short time. It's not a powerful quirk. It's not flashy. I nodded. A subtle power. The kind the world overlooked. Useful for a chemist moving delicate materials, but not for fighting off whatever lurked in the city's shadows. I'll keep that in mind. She gave a final, small nod and slipped out the door, her light footsteps retreating down the stairs until they were swallowed by the sound of the city. I stood there for a long moment, the key cool in my palm. The office was silent again, but the silence had changed. It was no longer empty. It was charged with the weight of a new puzzle, a new ghost to chase. I walked back to my desk and picked up the photograph of Kenji Uraraka. He had a gentle smile and kind eyes, much like his daughter, He looked like the last person in the world to get mixed up in something deadly. In my experience, those were always the first ones to go. I looked from his smiling face to the window, at the endless, weeping rain. The neon from Kaminari's noodle bar cast a sick, yellow glow on the papers spread across my desk. I had no powers. No backup. No illusions about the world I lived in. All I had was a notepad, a key, and a stubborn refusal to let the city swallow another soul without a fight. I poured the last of the bitter coffee into my mug. The case had begun. And I had a bad feeling, a cold certainty deep in my gut, that this was the kind of case that didn't end with a paycheck. It ended with rain on a fresh grave. Or two. The rain had eased to a miserable, persistent drizzle by the time I left my office, but the sky remained the color of a fresh bruise. Musudifus clouds never really left. They just sulked on the horizon, waiting for an excuse to start weeping again. I pulled the collar of my trench coat up, the damp wool a familiar, uncomfortable weight on my shoulders. In my pocket the cool, anonymous metal of Kenji Uraraka's apartment key felt heavier than it had any right to be. It wasn't just a key, it was a ticket into a dead man's life. Or a missing man's, I corrected myself. Hope, even the foolish, professional kind, dies hard. The Uraraka apartment was in a different part of the city, a neighborhood that had tried to climb out of the gutter, and had only made it halfway up the wall. The buildings were cleaner, the graffiti was less prevalent, and the neon signs advertised dentists instead of dive bars. It was the land of the aspiring middle class, a place of beige stucco and quiet desperation, where people pretended the grime from downtown couldn't reach them if they just kept their blinds closed. The building itself was a 5-story block of concrete and glass, its lobby sterile and smelling faintly of lemon-scented industrial cleaner. A security camera, its single red eye glowing, tracked me as I crossed the tiled floor to the elevator. It was a cheap model, the kind that recorded in grainy black and white, more a deterrent for kids with spray paint than a tool for catching real criminals. Still, it was a step up from my own building, where the only security was a landlord who occasionally yelled at loiterers from his window. I rode the elevator to the 4th floor, the canned music a tinny, soulless tune that probably came pre-installed. The silence in the hallway was absolute, a muffled quiet that felt artificial. The carpet, a swirling pattern of brown and gold, absorbed the sound of my footsteps. Apartment 4B. I stood before the door for a moment, listening. Nothing. Just the faint hum of a refrigerator from somewhere within. This was the part of the job I both hated and savored. The violation. A person's home is their sanctuary, their story written in the objects they choose to keep, the way they arrange their furniture, the scent that lingers in the air. To enter it uninvited felt like reading their diary. But it was also where the truth lived, hiding in plain sight. People could lie, but their spaces rarely did. I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a smooth, well-oiled click. The door swung open into silence. My first impression was one of order. Perfect, unnerving order. The small entryway had a neat shoe rack with 2 pairs of men's dress shoes and 1 pair of worn-in slippers, all perfectly aligned. A coat rack held a single, respectable-looking blazer. The air smelled of nothing. Not dust, not old coffee, not the faint scent of a person. It was neutral, sterile. It was wrong. I stepped inside, closing the door softly behind me. My eyes scanned the living room. It was modestly furnished, a simple gray sofa, a small coffee table with a neat stack of scientific journals, a television that was at least 5 years old. A large, framed photo sat on the mantel above a decorative electric fireplace. It was the same one Ochako had shown me, her and her father, smiling at a long-forgotten festival, their faces bright with a happiness that felt like a relic from another world in this silent, cold room. Everything was clean. Impossibly clean. I ran a finger along the top of the television. No dust. I checked the top of the doorframe. Nothing. I knelt and looked under the sofa. The floor was spotless. This wasn't just the home of a tidy man. This was the home of a man who had either just hired a professional cleaning crew with a quirk for eradicating filth, or someone else had been here after him. Someone who wanted to erase any trace of a struggle, of a presence, of a life. Detective Ogawa's report had called the scene unremarkable. Ogawa was an idiot. An unremarkable scene is the most remarkable thing in the world. Life is messy. It leaves fingerprints, scuff marks, dust bunnies, forgotten coffee rings. A complete lack of mess is a statement. It's a scream in a vacuum-sealed room. I moved to the small kitchen. It was an alcove off the main living area, compact and efficient. A dish rack next to the sink held one plate, one bowl, one glass, and a set of cutlery, all perfectly dry and stacked. The sponge in its holder was bone dry. The countertops gleamed under the fluorescent light. I opened the fridge. It was sparsely populated, a carton of milk, a half-dozen eggs, some vegetables in the crisper, a Tupperware container with leftover rice. The contents of a man living alone, orderly, but not sterile. This part felt real. I checked the expiration date on the milk. It was still good for another week. So he hadn't been planning a long trip. Next, the bedroom. A single bed, made with military precision, the blanket pulled taut, the pillow fluffed. A simple wooden dresser stood against one wall, a closet against the other. I opened the dresser drawers. Neatly folded shirts, socks rolled into pairs, underwear stacked. It was the portrait of a man of meticulous habit. Maybe Ogawa wasn't a complete fool. Maybe Kenji Uraraka was just this neat, but the feeling persisted. That cold, artificial cleanliness. It was like walking through a furniture showroom display, not a home. I went back to the living room and sat down on the edge of the sofa, the fabric stiff and unwelcoming. I closed my eyes, letting the silence of the apartment settle around me. My mind, the only tool I had that mattered, went to work. I put away the image of the tidy scientist. I put away the image of the grieving daughter. I looked only at the scene. Premise 1. Kenji Uraraka disappeared 3 nights ago. Premise 2. The police, specifically a detective with a sensory quirk, found nothing suspicious. Premise 3. The apartment is cleaner than a hospital operating theater. Conclusion. The scene has been manipulated. The police, with their reliance on flashy quirks, look for the obvious. They look for bloodstains, for overturned furniture, for the psychic residue of fear. They don't look for the absence of things. They don't notice the lack of dust, the unnatural stillness. They are hunters looking for a lion, and they walk right past the clearing where all the grass has been carefully pressed down. I opened my eyes. Now I knew what to look for. Not clues, but mistakes. The cleanup crew, whoever they were, would have been thorough. But no one is perfect. There's always a tell. A single hair, a missed spot, a detail out of place. I got on my hands and knees. This was the unglamorous part of the job. I started in the entryway, running my hand over the carpet, my eyes inches from the fibers. Nothing. I moved into the living room, a slow, methodical crawl. It was under the coffee table that I felt it. A faint, almost unnoticeable stickiness on the carpet fibers. I brought my fingers to my nose. A sharp, astringent smell. Not lemon. Something harsher. An industrial solvent. The kind used to clean up chemical spills. Or blood. The kind that wouldn't be in a normal household cleaning cabinet. My heart rate quickened. A small beat, but a definite one. The first piece. I stood up and surveyed the room again. My perspective shifted. I wasn't looking at a living room anymore. I was looking at a crime scene that had been expertly sanitized. Where would they have focused their efforts? Where would a struggle have taken place? Not in the open. Something would have been knocked over. My eyes fell on the bookshelf. It was a large, dark wood piece, filled from top to bottom. It dominated one wall of the room. It was the heaviest object in the apartment. I walked over to it, my footsteps silent on the carpet. I scanned the floor around its base. And there it was. So small Ogawa would have needed a magnifying glass and an actual desire to investigate to see it. A scuff mark. It was a thin, dark line on the light-colored wooden floorboard that bordered the carpet, right next to one of the bookshelf's feet. It was the kind of mark made when a heavy piece of furniture is dragged, not lifted, just an inch or two across the floor. A sign of haste. A sign of a struggle. Someone had shoved into it, or been shoved against it, and the cleanup crew, in their diligence to scrub the room clean, had missed this tiny indictment of their perfection. I felt a grim satisfaction. The first stone was starting to turn. Now my attention was fixed on the bookshelf itself. I scanned the spines. Advanced Organic Chemistry. The Principles of Molecular Photochemistry. A Botanist's Guide to Quark-Affected Flora. Quantum Mechanics for the Layman. The Library of a Brilliant, Curious Mind. These were Kenji Uraraka's tools, his passions. But one book stood out. It was sandwiched between a thick tome on polymer science and a textbook on cellular biology. Its spine was dark blue leather, worn with age, the title stamped in faded gold leaf. It didn't belong. Amidst the sea of scientific rationality, this book was an intruder from a different world. The Myths of Ancient Greece. I pulled it from the shelf. It felt different from the others. The paper was older, the binding softer. It was a book that had been read and reread, not just referenced. Why this? Why, in a library dedicated to the measurable and the provable, was there a book of fables? I thumbed through the pages. They were thin, almost brittle. The table of contents listed the usual cast of characters: Zeus and his thunderbolts, Poseidon and his trident, Hades and his gloomy kingdom, all tales of immense power, of gods whose quirks shaped the very world. It was a hero registry for an age before heroes. My thumb stopped on a chapter title that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Icarus, the boy who flew too close to the sun. The story was a classic noir tragedy in its own right. A brilliant inventor, Daedalus, trapped by a tyrant king. He devises an impossible escape, crafting wings of feather and wax for himself and his son. He gives his boy a single, crucial warning: don't fly too low, for the dampness will clog your wings, and don't fly too high, for the sun will melt the wax. But the boy, giddy with the power of flight, forgets the warning. He soars upward, a god in his own mind, until the sun's heat undoes his father's work. The wax melts, the feathers scatter, and he plummets into the sea. A story about the fatal flaw of ambition. A story about a secret formula and its deadly consequences. It was too perfect. This couldn't be a coincidence. I examined the pages of the chapter more closely. I ran my thumb over the edge of the paper. Near the binding, about halfway through the chapter, I felt it. A slight, almost imperceptible thickness. The pages there didn't separate as easily as the others. Using my thumbnail, I carefully pried at the edge. The page separated. It wasn't a single sheet of paper. 2 pages had been glued together with painstaking precision, and the center had been hollowed out. A book safe. The oldest trick in the book. But its very classicism was its genius. Who would look for a secret in a children's myth when surrounded by the complex secrets of modern science? My pulse was a steady drum in my ears. Inside the small, rectangular compartment lay 2 items. The first was a folded piece of thick, polymer-based paper, the kind used in high-security labs because it was resistant to water and fire. I carefully unfolded it. It was covered in a dense, dizzying array of chemical diagrams, molecular structures, and mathematical equations that made my head spin. It looked less like a formula and more like a schematic for a new universe. A few notes were scribbled in the margins in Kenji's neat hand. Unstable without catalyst 7. Cascade failure at thermal peak. Potential for quark factor degradation? I didn't know what any of it meant, but the last note sent a chill through me. Degradation? Not enhancement. Not regulation. Degradation. Destruction. The second item was a small, leather-bound notebook, no bigger than my palm. I opened it. The pages were filled not with words, but with code. Columns of numbers, symbols I didn't recognize, and what looked like dates. It was a ledger of some kind. A record. Of what, I had no idea. But a man like Kenji Uraraka doesn't go to this much trouble to hide his grocery list. This was it. This was what he was hiding. This was what he died for, or what he was taken for. The formula for a weapon and the records of its creation or distribution. I carefully folded the formula and tucked it, along with the ledger, into the inside pocket of my coat. I placed the hollowed-out book back on the shelf, exactly where I had found it. I did one last sweep of the apartment, my eyes now seeing it for what it was, a stage. The neatness, the order, it was all a carefully constructed lie designed to make people like Ogawa see what they wanted to see, nothing. But they had left a ghost behind. The ghost of a single, out-of-place book. I let myself out of the apartment, the lock clicking shut behind me. The hallway was still silent, the air still sterile. But now I knew it was the silence of a tomb. My next stop was downtown. If the Urarka apartment was the quiet, hidden part of the mystery, Detnerat Tower was its loud, arrogant, and very public face. It tore a hole in the sky, a monument of black glass and polished steel that drank the gray daylight and reflected nothing back but a distorted, broken image of the city. It was a middle finger to gravity, to the very concept of humility. People with powerful quirks, whether manipulators, structural engineers with reinforcement abilities, anti-gravity specialists, had built this place. It was a temple to what power could achieve. And I was about to walk into the lion's den wearing a cheap suit and a cynical expression. The lobby was a cathedral of corporate power. The ceiling was 3 stories high. The floor was black marble so polished I could see the tired lines on my face in it. A massive, abstract sculpture made of chrome and light hung in the center of the room, slowly rotating. It probably had a name like Synergy, or Innovation. I called it wasted money. The air was cool and smelled faintly of ozone and expensive perfume. The people moving through the space were all sharp suits, sharper haircuts, and the easy, predatory confidence of those who know they are on the right side of the food chain. Some of them radiated a low hum of power, the barely suppressed energy of their quirks. I walked up to the reception desk, a slab of white marble that looked like an altar. The woman behind it was a perfect corporate specimen. Impeccable hair, a smile that was both dazzling and utterly devoid of warmth, and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. I suspected a minor sensory or analysis quirk. They always put them on the front lines. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice a smooth, practiced melody. "Izuka Midoriya," I said, sliding one of my cheap business cards across the marble. "I have some questions about one of your employees." A Kenji Uraraka. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes hardened for a fraction of a second. She didn't look at the card. Regarding the fact that he's been missing for 3 days. "I see," she said. She typed something into a sleek, embedded keyboard. Her fingers moved with silent speed. "Mr. Uraraka did not report for his shift this week. We have logged his absence in accordance with company policy." "Company policy is all well and good," I said, leaning forward slightly, lowering my voice. "But his daughter is worried sick. She seems to think something might have happened to him. I was hoping someone in his department might know if he was working on anything stressful, if he had any disagreements with colleagues." "Mr. Midoriya," the receptionist said, her tone shifting from polite to condescendingly patient, "Detnerat employs over 5,000 people in this building alone. We are not a family. We are a corporation. The personal lives of our employees are their own concern." "His personal life seems to have intersected with his professional one right before he disappeared," I countered. "I find that very concerning." "You should too. He was working on sensitive projects, wasn't he?" Before she could answer, 2 men materialized on either side of me. They hadn't been there a second ago. They moved with a silent, coordinated grace that spoke of extensive training. They weren't cops. They were corporate soldiers. The one on my left was tall and impossibly broad, his suit tailored to contain a physique that was anything but natural. His quirk was probably some kind of physical enhancement. The one on my right was smaller, wiry, with dead, flat eyes. The air around him felt heavy. Oppressive. A pressure quirk, maybe? Something designed for intimidation. "Is there a problem here, ma'am?" The big one asked the receptionist, his voice a low gravelly rumble that vibrated in my chest. He never looked at me. I was just a piece of furniture he was preparing to move. "This gentleman was just leaving," the receptionist said, her smile back in full force. The wiry one finally turned his dead eyes on me. "You heard the lady. This was the wall. The polite, smiling, heavily armed wall of corporate denial. Pushing here would get me a free, one-way trip to the alley out back. I had what I came for anyway, the confirmation. A simple inquiry about a missing employee shouldn't warrant a visit from the goon squad." Their reaction was a confession. They were hiding something. They were nervous. I gave them a smile of my own, one that I hoped looked more tired than scared. My mistake. I must have the wrong department. I turned and walked away, feeling their eyes on my back every step of the way. I didn't let my pace quicken. I kept it slow, casual, as if I had all the time in the world. I didn't breathe easy until the automatic glass doors slid shut behind me and I was back on the pavement, the city's damp air filling my lungs. I stood across the street for a moment, just looking up at the black tower. Rain started to fall again, streaking the grime on my face. Ochako Uraraka had hired me to find her father, but this was bigger than a missing person. The too clean apartment, the hidden formula, the coded ledger, the instant and overwhelming hostility from a corporate giant. I had been hired to find a man, but I had stumbled onto a conspiracy. I felt like a man who had been told to investigate a strange noise in a basement, and upon opening the door, had found a sleeping dragon. I had just walked up and tapped it on the snout. The cage was rattled, the beast was stirring. And I was standing alone in the dark, with nothing but a few scraps of paper that I didn't understand and a growing certainty that I was in way over my head. I pulled my coat tighter and melted back into the crowd, just another faceless man in the rain. But I had the thread. The first, vital thread, and I was going to pull on it until the whole rotten tapestry unraveled, or until it strangled me. In Mizurufu, those were usually the only two options. The day bled into a long, gray afternoon, and then into a night that fell over Mizurufu like a shroud. The rain, my constant companion, intensified, drumming a frantic, syncopated rhythm on the roof of my car. My car, a beat-to-hell 78 Toyota that smelled of wet dog and regret, was more a shelter than a vehicle. Its engine had a smoker's cough and its alignment pulled to the left, a fitting metaphor for my life. I sat behind the wheel, parked 2 blocks down from Detnerat Tower, watching the last of the worker bees stream out of the hive, their expensive umbrellas a stark contrast to the cheap plastic poncho I kept balled up in my glove compartment. The coded ledger and the chemical formula were a heavy weight in my coat pocket. They were fire. Dangerous, incomprehensible fire. I could spend a week trying to decipher them and get nowhere. The ledger was a professional cryptographer's nightmare, and the formula might as well have been written in ancient Sumerian. I needed a translator. I needed someone who had seen this kind of darkness before and knew its language. I needed Tashinori Yagi. There was no phone number for him. No listed address. Yagi had fallen off the grid years ago, a deliberate and total self-exile. But men of habit are predictable, and Yagi was a creature of profound, sorrowful habit. He had his haunts, his secular churches where he went to commune with his ghosts. There were only 2 places he'd be. One was the graveyard where his wife was buried. The other was a bar called the Seventh Circle. Given the weather, I was betting on the bar. Reaching him wasn't a matter of calling. It was a ritual. I drove to a payphone, a relic from a bygone era, standing like a rusty sentinel on a forgotten street corner, and dropped a few coins in. I dialed the number for the bar. A gravelly voice answered on the 3rd ring. Yeah? Is the old ghost holding court tonight? I asked, using the coded phrase Yagi and I had established years ago. A pause. He's in his usual pew. The line went dead. That was my invitation. The Seventh Circle wasn't a place you just walked into. It was a pocket of the old city, tucked away in an alley that didn't appear on any official maps, a place for people who didn't want to be found. Its clientele was a curated collection of has-beens and never-weres, disgraced cops, retired information brokers, small-time crooks who had managed to live to old age. It was a museum of the city's failures, and Tashinori Yagi was its most prized exhibit. The bar had no sign. Just a heavy, unmarked iron door. I knocked twice, then once, then twice again. A slot slid open at eye level, revealing a pair of weary, suspicious eyes. They recognized me. The slot slammed shut, and a series of heavy bolts were drawn back. The door groaned open. The inside of the Seventh Circle smelled of stale whiskey, cigar smoke, and regret. The light was dim, colored a sickly amber by the low-wattage bulbs that hung over the bar. The air was thick with smoke and unspoken stories. A lone musician with a quirk that made his saxophone weep actual tears was playing a blues riff in the corner, the notes, sad and slow. No one clapped. They just listened, nursing their drinks, letting the music fill the empty spaces inside them. And there he was. In the darkest corner of the bar, at a small, scarred table, sat Toshinori Yagi. He looked like a ghost. The man who had once been the star detective of the Musutafu PD, a titan of justice spoken of in the same breath as the top pro heroes, was now a hollowed-out ruin. He was impossibly thin, his frame swallowed by a baggy, outdated suit that hung on him like a scarecrow's rags. His face was a roadmap of pain, carved with deep lines of suffering. His once bright blonde hair was dull and lifeless, and his eyes, those famous, piercing blue eyes, were sunken into dark, shadowed sockets. He held a glass of amber liquid, but he wasn't drinking it. He was just staring into it, as if searching for an answer at the bottom. I walked over, my footsteps echoing slightly in a sudden lull from the saxophone. I pulled out the chair opposite him and sat down. He didn't look up. "Deku," he said, his voice a dry, rasping whisper. It was a ghost of the booming, confident voice he once had. "You look like hell. More than usual." "I could say the same for you, Toshi," I replied, my voice low. "But I'd be lying. You always look like hell." A faint twitch at the corner of his mouth might have been a smile. Or a grimace. It was hard to tell. "To what do I owe the displeasure? You only come here when you've kicked a hornet's nest you can't handle alone." "I might have done more than kick it," I admitted. "I think I might have set the whole damn thing on fire." I didn't waste time. I slid the coded ledger and the polymer sheet with the formula across the table. I told him everything. The girl, Ochako Uraraka. The missing scientist father. The sterile apartment. The book of myths. The goon squad at Detonarat. He didn't touch the papers. He just stared at them, his sunken eyes tracing the edges. He didn't need to read the formula. He recognized its shape, its shadow. When I mentioned the name Detonarat, a muscle in his jaw twitched. It was the only sign of emotion he showed, but it was enough. "Detonarat," he breathed, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. He finally looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of the old fire in his eyes. It was a cold, dangerous fire, banked with years of pain and fury. "And the project name? Did you find a project name?" "Icarus," I said. The fire in his eyes died, replaced by a deep, world-weary sorrow. He slumped back in his chair, a sudden, sharp coughing fit racking his skeletal frame. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and pressed it to his lips. When he pulled it away, there was a small, dark stain of red on the white cloth. He folded it away quickly, but not before I saw it. "Get out," he rasped, his voice ragged. "Drop the case. Give the girl her money back and tell her father is gone. Tell her to run and never look back. Burn those papers and forget you ever saw them." "It's too late for that, Toshi," I said, my voice firm. "I'm in." "The girl is in?" "I need to know what this is." "You don't need to know," he hissed, leaning forward with a sudden, startling intensity. "You need to survive. You think you're tough, boy? You think because you're quirkless, you're invisible to them? You're a bug? A speck of dust. They won't even see you as they crush you." "Tell me about the case," I pressed, ignoring the warning. "Your case. The one that did this, to you?" I gestured vaguely at his gaunt frame. He stared at me for a long time, his gaze weighing, measuring. The saxophone started up again, a long, mournful wail. Finally, he sighed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "It wasn't Detonarat back then," he began, his voice low and conspiratorial. "It was a different company. A pharmaceutical startup called Creations. They were working on a miracle drug. A quirk booster. Something that could amplify a person's natural abilities tenfold. They called it Prometheus. Giving fire to the mortals." I nodded slowly. Icarus. Prometheus. A theme was emerging. The hubris of mortals reaching for the power of gods. "It was funded by a shadow benefactor," Yagi continued, his eyes focused on the past. "A philanthropist nobody had ever seen. A ghost with a bottomless bank account. The project was top secret, but there were whispers. Rumors of failed experiments. Test subjects disappearing. One of the lead scientists got a conscience. A good man, like your Uraraka sounds. He tried to blow the whistle. He came to me." He paused, taking a shaky breath. I was at the top of my game then. The MPD's golden boy. I thought I was untouchable. I started digging. I got close. Too close. I found a lab, an illegal one, out in the industrial district. I went in alone, didn't wait for backup. Pride. That was my sin. His hand instinctively went to his side, where a ruin of scar tissue lay hidden beneath his cheap suit. They were waiting for me. It wasn't a lab. It was a trap. The man in charge was there, not the ghost benefactor. His enforcer. A monster. I've never seen a quirk like it. He could take things. My strength, my speed, he drained me like a battery. And then... He closed his eyes. He destroyed the building with me inside it. Just brought the whole thing down. I should have died. But you didn't, I said softly. No, he whispered. I lived. But the detective, the hero, he died in that wreckage. They destroyed my evidence, my witness, my career. The official story was a gas line explosion. Case closed. The company creations dissolved overnight. Vanished. And the philanthropist who funded it all? He was never found. He was a ghost. He looked at the papers on the table. Until now. This is his work. Detonarad is his new shell. Icarus is the next generation of Prometheus. And you, boy, are walking the exact same path I did. He leaned forward again, his skeletal hands gripping the edge of the table. Drop it, Izuku. This isn't a crime lord you're chasing. This is a force of nature, a puppet master who owns this city, from the highest hero to the lowest gutter rat. You pull this thread, and he won't just cut it. He'll pull you down into the abyss with it. His warning hung in the air, thick and heavy as the smoke. I believed him. Every word. The cold dread in my stomach told me he was right. This was a pit of vipers, and I had just jumped in, but I thought of Ochako Uraraka's face, the desperate hope in her eyes. I thought of the sterile, silent apartment, and the man who had been erased from his own life. I can't, I said. I won't. Yagi stared at me, and a complex expression crossed his face, a mixture of frustration, pity, and a faint, almost imperceptible glimmer of pride. He looked like a father watching his son make the same mistake he did. You stubborn damn fool, he wheezed. You're just like I was. He finally reached out a trembling hand and tapped the coded ledger. This is a transaction list. Dates, quantities, buyers. But the code, it's tied to the formula. The numbers correspond to specific molecular chains in the compound. You can't break one without the other. It's brilliant. It's his signature. So it's useless? I asked, a knot of frustration tightening in my gut. To you, yes, Yagi said. But not to everyone. The MPD has a cryptology department. State of the art. They could crack this. But you can't just walk in and hand it to them. The puppet master has his strings in the department. He'll have a mole. The evidence would disappear, and so would you. He leaned back, his energy spent. You're trapped, boy. You have the truth in your hands, but you can't show it to anyone. He was right. I was holding a key with no door, a map with no legend. I gathered the papers, the weight of their secrets pressing down on me. Thank you, Toshi, I said, standing up. Don't thank me, he rasped, turning his gaze back to his untouched drink. I just gave you the eulogy for your own funeral. Get out of here. The ghosts in this place don't like new company. I left him there, a king of sorrow on his lonely throne, and walked out of the seventh circle, back into the rain-swept alley. The iron door boomed shut behind me, sealing the crypt. Yagi's warning echoed in my mind. A mole in the MPD. A puppet master pulling the strings. I was alone, or so I thought. As I stepped out of the alley and onto the main street, a shadow detached itself from a darkened doorway across the road. The figure was tall, silhouetted by the streetlights, the collar of his coat turned up against the rain. Even in the gloom, there was no mistaking the aggressive, predatory posture. The scent of ozone and burnt sugar faintly hit the air, a sure sign of his quirk. Katsuki Bikugo. He crossed the street in a few long, angry strides, the water on the pavement seeming to hiss and steam around his boots. He stopped a few feet in front of me, his crimson eyes burning with a furious, incandescent light. Bakugo wasn't just a detective in the MPD's Violent Crimes Division, he was a human explosion, a walking embodiment of rage and power. And he was the last person I wanted to see tonight. Deku, he snarled, the name a curse on his lips. What the hell are you doing sniffing around my case? So, it was his. Of course it was. A high-profile disappearance from a major corporation. It would land right on the desk of the department's hotshot rising star. It's a free country, Kakin, I said, my voice deliberately calm. The old childhood nickname was a match thrown on gasoline, and I knew it. A citizen hired me to find a missing person. It's called a job. You might have heard of them. His hands, shoved deep in his pockets, curled into fists. I could almost feel the heat radiating from them. Don't play dumb with me, you worthless pebble. I saw you at Detnerat today. I saw you leaving the Uraraka apartment. And I just saw you crawl out of that pit of has-beens. His eyes narrowed. You're meddling. Whatever little game you're playing, it ends now. This is official police business. Official police business that wrote the case off as a man taking a vacation? I shot back, my own temper starting to fray. Your partner Ogawa barely gave the girl the time of day. If you're so invested, why the brush off? That's none of your goddamn business. He roared, taking a step closer. The air crackled with energy. A few passers-by gave us a wide berth, hurrying on their way. A confrontation with a man like Bakugo was something sane people avoided. I'm running this investigation my way. I don't need a quirkless, ambulance-chasing parasite getting under my feet and messing things up. The word quirkless was a physical blow, as it always was from him. It was his favorite weapon, the one he knew could still wound me after all these years. He saw me as the same useless kid from our childhood, the one who pathetically tried to stand up to bullies without an ounce of power to his name. A bitter reminder of a past he wanted to forget. A past where I had been the one to offer him a hand when he had fallen. I'm not messing things up. I'm doing the job your department was too lazy or too compromised to do, I said, my voice low and cold. The apartment was scrubbed clean, Bakugo. Wiped. Sanitized. Did Ogawa's magic nose pick that up, or was he too busy smelling his own arrogance? For a split second, a flicker of something other than rage crossed his face. Surprise? Uncertainty? He was a bloodhound, not a forensic analyst. He looked for perps to punch, not for clues in the absence of evidence. I had just shown him a card he didn't know was in the deck, but his pride, as massive and explosive as his quirk, wouldn't allow him to admit it. He shoved me, a hard, powerful impact against my shoulder that sent me stumbling back a step. Stay out of it, Deku, he growled, his face inches from mine. I could smell the rain on his coat and the faint, acrid scent of nitroglycerin that always clung to him. This is your only warning. The next time I see you near this case, I'm not just going to warn you. I'm going to arrest you for obstruction and lock you in a cell so deep you'll forget what the sun looks like. Are we clear? I stared into his furious red eyes. Beneath the rage I saw something else. A frustration that mirrored my own. He was a blunt instrument in a world of scalpels. He knew something was wrong with the case, he could feel it, but he didn't have the tools to pick it apart. He was being stonewalled by his own superiors, and he was taking his rage out on the only available target, me. Yagi's words echoed in my head. A mole in the department. Bakugo wasn't the mole, but he was being manipulated by them, fed bad information, pointed in the wrong direction. His presence here, tailing me, confirmed it. They were interested. But someone was pulling his leash, telling him to keep it quiet. Crystal, I said, my voice flat. He held my gaze for another moment, as if trying to incinerate me with his stare alone. Then, with a final, contemptuous snort, he turned and stalked off into the night, disappearing into the rain and gloom as quickly as he had appeared. I stood there on the wet pavement, the rain plastering my hair to my forehead. The heat of the confrontation faded, leaving a cold certainty in its place. I was caught between a shadowy puppet master so powerful he had brought the great Tashinori Yagi to his knees, and a furious, bull-headed detective who saw me as nothing more than a ghost from a past he despised. I was no longer just investigating a crime. I was fighting a war on two fronts, with no allies and no weapons. I looked down at my hands. Empty. Quirkless. Useless. No. Not useless. I felt the weight of the papers in my coat. I had the truth. A dangerous, coded, deadly truth. Bakugo had the brawn. The MPD had the resources. The puppet master had the power. But I had the mind. The one thing they always underestimated. Yagi had called me a fool. Bakugo had called me a parasite. They were both wrong. I was a detective. And my investigation had just begun. The encounter with Bakugo left a bitter taste in my mouth, more so than my stale coffee. His rage was a physical force, a storm front that had rolled in and left the air charged and heavy. But it was Yagi's words that echoed in the silence of my car as I drove through the glittering, rain-slicked canyons of the city. A mole in the MPD. A puppet master. I was completely and utterly walled in. The official channels were not just closed, they were booby-trapped. Walking into an MPD precinct with the formula and ledger would be like delivering a pizza to my own execution. Detnerat's corporate fortress was guarded by men who could probably bench press my car. Yagi was a ghost, offering warnings from the tomb of his own career but unable to step back into the light. And Bakugo. Bakugo was a bloodhound on a leash, straining to chase a scent his masters didn't want him to follow. He was more of a threat than an ally, his explosive pride a liability I couldn't afford. I was at a dead end. A concrete wall at the end of a blind alley. The truth I held was a live grenade with the pin pulled, and my hands were starting to sweat. In Muzurifu, when you hit a wall like this, you have two choices. You can turn back and pretend you never saw it, or you can find a way to go under it. The city had its official maps, the neat grid of streets and laws and heroes that everyone pretended to live by. But beneath that, there was another map, a shadow geography of whispers, favors, and secrets. To navigate it, you needed a guide. You needed an information broker. The city was lousy with them. Small-time snitches who'd sell their own mother for a bottle of cheap whiskey, data miners with quirks that let them skim digital communications, gossips who traded secrets like playing cards. But for something this big, this toxic, I needed more than a common snitch. I needed someone who operated in the deep shadows, someone with access to the highest levels of corruption and the skill to survive there. I needed someone who didn't just listen to the city's whispers, but who could hear its silent, secret heartbeat. I needed Sharon. The name was a legend in the underworld, a ghost story told by other ghosts. No one knew who Sharon was, or even if they were a single person. They were a phantom, a whisper on the digital wind. The only way to contact them was through a complex, multi-layered process designed to ensure absolute anonymity for both broker and client. It was a descent into the city's digital sticks, and the price of passage was steep. I drove to a 24-hour net cafe in a part of town where the neon signs were mostly broken and the patrons looked like they had lost a fight with life. The place smelled of burnt plastic and stale energy drinks. I paid cash for an hour on a private terminal in a sticky, enclosed booth. The machine was old, the keyboard grimy, but it was connected to the deep web. That was all that mattered. Following a protocol I had learned from a paranoid client years ago, I navigated through a series of encrypted proxies and dead-end forums. It was a digital maze, each turn leading to another layer of security. Finally, I landed on a stark black screen with a single, blinking cursor. No name, no logo. Just a text box. This was the ferryman's dock. I typed my request. It had to be specific enough to be understood, but vague enough not to set off alarms. Inquiry, Project Icarus. Detnerat Corporation seeking key personnel and operational enforcers. High-risk profile. Discretion paramount. The price of information in this world wasn't yen. It was favors. Dangerous, open-ended favors. I typed my offer of payment. Payment, one future consideration. Unspecified. At broker's discretion. It was the highest price you could offer. A blank check on your future. It was a sign of both desperation and seriousness. I hit enter. The screen went blank for a moment, then a single line of text appeared. Acknowledged. Stand by for location. I waited. The minutes stretched out, each one a small eternity. The whir of the computer's fan was the only sound. This was the moment of judgment. Sharon could refuse. They could send me on a wild goose chase. They could sell my query to Detnerat, and the next knock on my door would be from the men in the sharp suits. I was putting my life in the hands of a ghost. After 10 agonizing minutes, new text appeared. An address. No time, no instructions. Just a location, the Hyacinth House. Rooftop greenhouse. Midnight, my blood ran cold. The Hyacinth House wasn't some back alley dive. It was one of the most exclusive, high-end apartment complexes in the entire city, a gleaming white spire in the affluent Todoroki district. It was famous for its state-of-the-art security, its wealthy residents, and its rooftop garden, a climate-controlled paradise of exotic plants. It was the last place I'd expect a shadow broker to operate. It was either a trap, or Sharon was someone with the power and status to move in those circles with impunity. Either possibility was terrifying. I had 3 hours to get there. The Hyacinth House was even more imposing up close. It was a fortress of wealth, its white marble facade glowing under perfectly placed spotlights. A doorman in a crisp, military-style uniform stood guard, his posture radiating a quiet, professional menace. He probably had a quirk that could spot a fake designer handbag at 50 paces. My beater Toyota would have been towed and likely incinerated if I'd parked it within a 2-block radius. I'd left it 6 blocks away and walked the rest of the way, my trench coat and cheap suit marking me as an alien in this polished world. Getting in the front door was impossible. But buildings like this had weaknesses. They were built to keep threats from the street out, not from the sky. I circled the block, my eyes scanning the architecture. The fire escape was enclosed, alarmed. The windows were seamless plates of glass. But on the north side of the building, there was a service alley. It was clean, well lit, and monitored by a camera, but it was still a service alley. And halfway down, there was a series of external maintenance ladders, leading up to the HVAC units on the 5th floor mezzanine. It wasn't a direct route to the roof, but it was a foothold. It was a stupid risk. A gamble born of desperation. But I was running on nothing but those two things. Waiting for the security patrol to pass, I slipped into the alley. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was pure, old-fashioned breaking and entering. No quirk to make me invisible, no power to let me fly. Just worn-out shoe leather and a prayer that no one would look up. The climb was hell. The metal rungs were slick with drizzle, the wind whipping around the corner of the building, trying to pry my fingers loose. I moved slowly, methodically, testing each rung before putting my full weight on it. My body, unused to this kind of exertion, screamed in protest. By the time I reached the mezzanine, my muscles were trembling and my lungs were burning. From the mezzanine, it was a spider's climb up a series of drain pipes and maintenance struts, my fingers finding purchase in seams of the building's facade. It was a vertical puzzle, and one wrong move would send me plummeting to the alley below. The city sprawled out beneath me, a breathtaking, terrifying vista of light and shadow. For a moment, I understood the temptation of Icarus. The view from up here was intoxicating. Finally, my fingers closed over the lip of the roof. I hauled myself over the edge, collapsing onto the rooftop, panting and soaked with a mixture of rain and sweat. I lay there for a moment, my cheek pressed against the cold, gritty tar, just breathing. I got to my feet and looked around. The rooftop was a maze of vents, satellite dishes, and machinery. And there, in the center, was the greenhouse. It was a beautiful, crystalline dome, glowing with a soft, warm light from within, a fragile bubble of life perched atop a mountain of concrete and steel. I approached the entrance, a simple glass door. It was unlocked. Sharon was expecting me. I stepped inside, and the change was immediate. The air was warm, humid, and sweet with the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers. It was a stark contrast to the cold, sterile city outside. Exotic plants with vibrant, impossible colors grew in abundance. There were flowers that glowed with their own faint bioluminescence, vines with leaves of pure silver, and ferns that seemed to whisper as I passed. This wasn't just a greenhouse. It was a collection, a curated gallery of nature's strangest and most beautiful quirks. And in the center of the dome, sitting on a simple stone bench, was a young man. He was my age, maybe a year or two younger. He was dressed in simple, expensive casual wear. He had striking, bicolored hair, one half a stark, shocking white, the other a fiery crimson. But the most arresting thing about him was his face. The left side was marred by a severe burn scar, a puckered, angry swath of tissue that pulled at the corner of his eye and lip, giving him a permanent expression of tragic intensity. His eyes were two different colors, the right one a calm, cool gray, the left a brilliant, piercing turquoise. He didn't look up as I approached. He was carefully tending to a small, delicate-looking plant with crystalline blue flowers, his touch gentle. The air around him shimmered, and I realized with a start that the entire greenhouse was being climate-controlled by him. The left side of his body radiated a palpable cold, while the right emanated a subtle warmth. He was a human thermostat, maintaining this fragile ecosystem with his own body. This was Sharon? This boy? He was nothing like the grizzled, paranoid spooks I had imagined. "You're late," he said, his voice a low, even monotone. He still hadn't looked at me. "And you smell of desperation and alley filth. You climbed." It wasn't a question. The direct approach seemed unwise, I said, my voice a little breathless. "Unwise is offering an open-ended favor for information on All for One's network," he countered, finally turning to look at me. His mismatched eyes were unnervingly perceptive. They seemed to see right through my cheap suit and tired facade. "It's suicidal." My blood froze. All for One. The name was a bogeyman, a myth whispered in the darkest corners of the underworld. A crime lord from a bygone era, a figure of immense power who was said to possess multiple quirks, to be able to steal them from others. A monster from the dawn of the hero age. Most people thought he was dead, or just a story to scare rookie villains. Yagi had called his nemesis a ghost, a puppet master. He hadn't used the name. But this kid, he said it like he was talking about the weather. "I didn't use that name in my request," I said, my hand instinctively going to the pocket where the formula lay hidden. "You didn't have to," the young man said, standing up. He was taller than me, with a lean, aristocratic grace. Project Icarus, Detonarat, high-level enforcers who leave no trace. All roads in the city's underworld eventually lead to him. He is the gravity well that pulls all darkness into its orbit. "You're asking for a map of hell." He paused, his gaze intense. "Why? I was hired to find a missing man." "No," he said, taking a step closer. "You could have dropped the case after you realized what you'd stumbled into. A missing scientist isn't worth your life. You're doing this for another reason. You're doing this because you think it's the right thing to do." He said the words "right thing" not with admiration, but with a kind of clinical curiosity, as if it were a rare and fascinating psychological condition. "That makes you predictable. And very, very vulnerable." "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He gave a small, humorless smile. "I am the man who ferries secrets across the river. You may call me Sharon." He gestured to the sprawling city lights visible through the glass dome. "And this is my watchtower." He then added, as if it were an afterthought, "My father owns this building. He finds the view inspiring." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The Todoroki district. The bicolored hair. The fire and ice quirk. The scar. "Your father is police commissioner Endeavor." "He is, Sharon." Todoroki confirmed, his voice laced with a cold, refined venom. "The number 2 hero. The city's shield. A pillar of justice." He looked at his scarred hand. "And a monster who built his legacy on pain and ambition. I use his network, his resources, his name, to watch him. To watch all of them. I am the ghost in my father's machine. I am the flaw in his perfect world." I was speechless. I had come seeking an underworld information broker and found the estranged, rebellious son of the most powerful and corrupt cop in the city. A boy using his gilded cage as a sniper's nest, waging a quiet, one-man war against his own family and the corrupt system they represented. "Your favor," he said, his tone shifting back to business. "I'm calling it in now. In advance." "I haven't even gotten the information yet," I protested. "The information I am about to give you will likely get you killed," he stated, as if it were an obvious fact. "Therefore, I must collect my payment, while you are still alive to provide it. My price is this: when you inevitably confront the men behind this, you will create a significant, public, and undeniable disruption. You will cause a scandal so large that even my father, with all his power and influence, cannot sweep it under the rug. You will damage his reputation. That is my price. He wanted me to be a bomb. A kamikaze. He wanted me to blow a hole in his father's empire, and he didn't care if I was caught in the blast. It was a cold, cruel, and brilliant strategy. I thought about it for a second. His goal and mine, for now, were aligned. We both wanted to burn the corruption down. We were just holding different ends of the match. Deal, I said. He nodded, seemingly satisfied. He turned and walked over to a small, discreet terminal nestled among the plants. He typed for a moment, his fingers moving with practiced ease, a small, high-speed printer whirred to life, spitting out a single sheet of paper. He took it and handed it to me. Project Icarus, as you've surmised, is a weapon, he began to explain, his voice a calm, steady lecture. It is a retro-engineered quark-suppressing agent, derived from an earlier project codenamed Prometheus. In its stable, refined form, it can temporarily nullify a person's quark factor. In its unstable, raw state, it can cause catastrophic cellular decay, effectively erasing a quark permanently, often with fatal side effects. Your scientist, Kenji Uraraka, was not just the lead chemist, he was the one who perfected the stabilization process. He made the weapon viable. I looked down at the paper. It was a dossier. A face stared back at me from a grainy surveillance photo. A young man with wild, pale blue hair, his face obscured by what looked like a dismembered hand. His expression was one of pure, nihilistic rage. Dednarat provides the lab and the funding, Todoroki continued. All for One provides the direction. But he doesn't get his own hands dirty. For operations, he uses his apprentice. His chosen successor. He tapped the photo. Tamyara Shigaraki. That is the name he goes by. His quirk is decay. Anything he touches with all 5 fingers of one hand disintegrates into dust. Living or non-living, he is All for One's primary enforcer. The one sent to clean up loose ends. He leaves nothing behind but dust. No bodies, no evidence, no witnesses. A cold dread, colder than the air on Todoroki's left side, seeped into my bones. This was the monster Yagi had faced. This was the force that had erased Kenji Uraraka. A man who could turn people to dust. How do you fight that? How do you even survive being in the same room with that? Shigaraki is a true believer, Todoroki went on, his voice detached, analytical. He hates this hero-centric society with a passion that borders on religious fervor. He sees quirks as a disease, and heroes as false idols. He believes All for One is a savior who will tear down the whole corrupt system. He is not a simple thug, he is a zealot. He is unstable, childish, and lethally dangerous. He is currently tying up the loose ends of Project Icarus, eliminating any scientists or researchers who know too much. The dossier contained more. A list of other scientists on the project. Their addresses, their routines. A list of potential targets. My heart pounded. This wasn't just information, it was a hit list. Uraraka's father wasn't just a victim, I said, thinking aloud, piecing it together. He tried to run. He took the formula, the real data. Correct, Todoroki affirmed. Which makes his daughter a liability. And a point of leverage. They will use her to get the research back. Shigaraki will be the one they send. My blood ran cold. Ochako. She wasn't just my client. She was the next target. I have to warn her, I said, turning to leave. That would be unwise, Todoroki said, stopping me. They are watching her. I guarantee it. If you approach her directly, you will lead them right to her, and you will both be turned to dust. You are a quirkless detective. Shigaraki is a living plague. It is not a fight you can win. So what do I do? I asked, my voice raw with frustration. I just let him get to her? Todoroki looked at me, his mismatched eyes holding a strange, almost pitying expression. You wanted a map of hell, Mr. Midoriya. I have given it to you. I have upheld my end of the bargain. What you do with that map is up to you. He turned his back on me and went back to his plants. Now I suggest you leave the way you came. And try not to die. A dead man cannot create the scandal I require. The dismissal was absolute. I was a tool, and he was finished with me for now. I stood there for a moment, the dossier clutched in my hand, the humid air of the greenhouse feeling thick and suffocating. I had gotten what I came for. The name of the puppet master, the identity of the monster, the nature of the weapon. But the knowledge was a poison. It didn't empower me, it paralyzed me. I looked at Todoroki, the lonely prince in his glass tower, tending his strange garden while waging a cold war against his own father. He was a ghost of a different kind, a boy raised in the shadow of a corrupt titan, using the master's tools to dismantle the master's house. We were both fighting the same beast, but our methods, our worlds, were miles apart. I left the greenhouse, the sweet scent of flowers replaced once more by the cold, biting wind of the rooftop. The climb down was even more terrifying than the climb up, my mind preoccupied with images of a man turning to dust, of Ochako's trusting face, of the cold, calculating gaze of Shoto Todoroki. By the time I reached the alley, my entire body ached, and my spirit felt bruised and battered. I had descended into the city's shadow world and met its ferryman. He had shown me the face of my enemy, and it was the face of death itself. The climb down from the Hyacinth house left me with more than just aching muscles and scraped knuckles. It left me with a corrosive fear that settled deep in my bones, a cold I couldn't shake no matter how tightly I gripped the steering wheel of my car. The dossier from Todoroki sat on the passenger seat, a square of innocent-looking paper that held the weight of a death sentence. Tamyara Shigaraki. Quirk, decay. I drove aimlessly for a while, the city lights smearing into neon ribbons through the rain-streaked windshield. My mind was a maelstrom. Every instinct screamed at me to follow Todoroki's cold, pragmatic advice. Warn Ochako, get her to run, disappear. But his logic was a steel trap. They would be watching her. My appearing on her doorstep would be like painting a target on her back. I'd be leading the wolf right to the lamb, but doing nothing felt like a betrayal. It felt like leaving a loaded gun on a table, and just hoping a child doesn't pick it up. The dossier contained a list of names. The other scientists from Project Icarus. The loose ends. According to Todoroki's intel, Shigaraki was a clean-up crew. He was a ghost who erased the past. If I couldn't protect Ochako directly, maybe I could get ahead of him. Maybe I could find one of the other scientists, warn them, and learn something more about Kenji Uraraka's last days, what his plan had been, where he might have hidden the real research. It was a long shot, a desperate play, but it was the only one I had. I pulled over under the flickering light of a street lamp and opened the dossier again. The list was short. 3 names besides Kenji Uraraka. 2 were senior researchers living in high-security, company-owned apartments downtown. Approaching them would be impossible, like trying to walk back into Detnerat Tower. But the 3rd name was different. Dr. Akio Takeda. Junior chemist. Residence, Kojima Apartments, Lower District 3. Lower District 3. That was my part of town. It was the city's grimy, neglected basement, a labyrinth of crumbling tenement buildings, narrow alleys choked with overflowing dumpsters, and the perpetual gloom cast by the elevated expressways overhead. It was a place where people learned to keep their heads down and not ask questions. A place where a man could disappear, and the only ones who'd notice were the loan sharks and the landlord. Takeda was my best shot. My only shot. Finding the Kojima Apartments wasn't hard. It was a monument to urban decay, a 6-story block of stained concrete that looked like it was slowly surrendering to gravity. The windows were dark, grimy squares, many of them cracked or boarded over. The air in the stairwell smelled of boiled cabbage, damp rot, and misery. Takeda's apartment was on the 5th floor. I stood outside his door, listening. Faintly, through the thin wood, I could hear the tinny sound of a television news broadcast. He was home. I raised my hand to knock, but hesitated. What was I going to say? Hello, you don't know me, but a shadowy organization and their pet sociopath who can turn people to dust are probably coming to kill you. Care for a chat? I needed a better approach. A way to get him to talk without sending him into a blind panic. I decided on the truth, or a carefully edited version of it. I was a PI looking for his missing colleague. It was simple, professional, and hopefully, not terrifying enough to get the door slammed in my face. I knocked. 3 sharp raps. The television sound cut off abruptly. Silence. I could feel him on the other side of the door, holding his breath, just as I had. "Who is it?" A man's voice called out, thin and reedy with anxiety. "My name is Izuku Midoriya. I'm a private investigator," I said, keeping my voice calm and even. "I've been hired by Ochako Uraraka to find her father. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions about your colleague, Dr. Takeda." A long pause. I heard the scraping sound of a security chain being drawn. The door opened a few inches, revealing a sliver of a man's face. He was young, maybe late 20s, with thinning hair, glasses perched on a nervous nose, and the pale, sallow complexion of someone who spent more time with lab equipment than with the sun. His eyes were wide with a fear that went far beyond simple social anxiety. This was a man who was already terrified. "Uraraka-san's daughter?" he whispered. "The police said he left." "The police were wrong," I said, my voice low. "I think he was in some kind of trouble, doctor. The kind of trouble you might know something about." His eyes darted past me, scanning the empty, dingy hallway. I can't talk. You shouldn't be here." He started to close the door. "Project Icarus," I said, the words a key turning in a lock. He froze. His face went ashen. The fear in his eyes curdled into sheer terror. He knew. Of course he knew. "Please," he whimpered, his voice barely audible. "Go away. They could be watching." "They're not just watching, doctor. They're closing the books," I pressed, pushing my advantage. "Uraraka was the first. Who's next? You have to talk to me. It might be your only chance." He looked like a cornered animal. His gaze flickered between me and the darkness of his apartment. He was doing a frantic, desperate calculation of risk. Was the stranger at the door more dangerous than the shadows he was already hiding from? "Not here," he finally choked out. "The alley? Behind the building. 10 minutes. I'll use the fire escape." He slammed the door shut. I heard the chain rattle back into place, followed by the sound of a deadbolt turning. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It was a reckless move, but it had worked. I had my meeting. I turned and headed back down the stairs, my senses on high alert. The building felt different now. The shadows in the corners of the stairwell seemed deeper, the silence more menacing. Takeda's fear was contagious. He wasn't just paranoid. He knew he was being hunted. The alley behind the Kojima apartments was a narrow, claustrophobic canyon between brick walls. The ground was littered with broken bottles, discarded food containers, and the general detritus of forgotten lives. A single, bare bulb above a service entrance cast a sickly yellow light, creating long, distorted shadows that danced and writhed like living things. The air was thick with the stench of wet garbage from a row of overflowing dumpsters. It was the perfect place for a secret meeting. It was also the perfect place for an ambush. I found a spot in the deepest part of the shadows, pressed against the cold, damp brick of the opposite building, and I waited. My heart was a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. Every skittering rat, every drip of water from a leaky pipe, every distant siren made me jump. I was a bundle of raw nerves, my body screaming at me that this was a mistake. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then 15. He wasn't coming. My stomach twisted into a knot of dread. Had he chickened out? Or had I been too late? Had they gotten to him already, in the 10 minutes it took me to get down the stairs? I was about to give up, to write it off as a loss and retreat back to the relative safety of my car, when I heard it. A faint scraping sound from above. I looked up. The rusted metal cage of the building's fire escape groaned in protest. A figure was climbing down, moving with a clumsy, panicked haste. Dr. Takeda. He was wearing a dark hoodie, the hood pulled up to obscure his face. He carried a small backpack, clutched tightly to his chest. He was running. He wasn't coming for a chat. He was making a break for it. He dropped the last few feet to the ground, landing with a grunt. He immediately started jogging down the alley, away from the street, toward the deeper darkness at the far end. He hadn't seen me. He was too consumed by his own fear to look anywhere but forward. "Takeda!" I called out, my voice a harsh whisper. I stepped out of the shadows. He spun around, a startled cry escaping his lips. His face, illuminated by the single yellow bulb, was a mask of pure terror. You! What are you doing? I told you to wait. You were running, I said, taking a step toward him. Where are you going? Away! He hissed, clutching his backpack like a holy relic. I have to get out of the city. I have to disappear. Uraraka-san, he tried to warn me. He told me what they were planning to do with Icarus. He said they wouldn't let any of us walk away. What did he tell you? What was his plan? I asked, closing the distance between us. He had a failsafe, Takeda stammered, his eyes wide and unfocused. Copies of the research. Proof. He said he hid it. Said if anything happened to him, it would all come out. But they found him first, and now they're coming for the rest of us. This was it. The confirmation I needed. But before I could ask him where the failsafe was, a new sound cut through the alley's quiet. Footsteps. They weren't my heavy tread or Takeda's frantic shuffle. They were slow, deliberate, unhurried. The footsteps of a predator that knows its prey is trapped. They came from the mouth of the alley, the direction Takeda had been trying to avoid. A figure emerged from the darkness, stepping into the sickly yellow light. It was him. The grainy surveillance photo from Todoroki's dossier hadn't done him justice. He was taller than I expected, with a thin, almost emaciated frame. His pale blue hair was a chaotic mess, but it was his face that stopped my breath. He had dry, cracked lips, and a raw, chafed-looking patch of skin around his eyes, as if he'd been scratching at them for years. And on his face, held there by some unseen method, was a single, pale, dismembered hand, its fingers obscuring his nose and mouth, its thumb hooked under his eye. It was a grotesque, horrifying mask. He wore a simple black hoodie and black pants, but it was the way he carried himself that was so terrifying. A loose, slouchy posture, a slight stoop, as if the weight of his own nihilistic rage was physically bending his spine. He looked like a petulant teenager, and a 1,000-year-old demon all at once. Tamura Shigaraki had arrived. Dr. Takeda made a sound, a high-pitched, strangled whimper, like a rabbit caught in a snare. Pure, unadulterated terror. He turned to run, but his legs seemed to give out. He stumbled, falling to his knees, his backpack spilling its contents, a change of clothes, a toothbrush, a passport, onto the grimy pavement. I was frozen. Every nerve ending, every survival instinct I possessed, was screaming at me to run, to hide, to cease to exist. My body was locked in place, my feet seemingly fused to the ground. I was a statue in a graveyard, watching the groundskeeper come to collect a soul. I was hidden in the deep shadows, 20 feet away, but it felt like he was staring right at me. Shigaraki took a slow step forward, then another. He moved with a lazy, almost bored shuffle. Another hero, he rasped, his voice dry and scratchy, like sandpaper on bone. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Takeda, who was now scrabbling backward on his hands and knees. Always popping up like glitches in a game I'm trying to finish. You scientists. You're just NPCs. You have your function, you deliver your data, and then you're supposed to pawn. Please, Takeda begged, his voice dissolving into sobs. I won't say anything. I'll leave. I'll forget everything. Please! Shigaraki tilted his head, a gesture that was disturbingly childlike. But that's the problem with you NPCs, he said, a note of petulant anger entering his voice. You don't follow the rules. You develop bugs. A conscience. You try to start a new quest line. It's so annoying. It ruins the immersion. He was close now, standing over the weeping scientist. He slowly, deliberately, began to pull a 5-fingered glove off his right hand. My mind screamed. Don't watch. Run. Get out. But I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I was a witness, shackled to this moment by a morbid, horrified paralysis. Sensei is very disappointed, Shigaraki continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He gave you all so much. Resources? A purpose. And you repay him with betrayal. It's not fair. He reached out his bare hand. His movements were languid, unhurried. He wasn't a killer in a fit of rage. He was a bored god, swatting a fly. His 5 fingertips made contact with Takeda's shoulder. For a split second, nothing happened. Takeda looked up, a flicker of confusion in his terrified eyes. And then it began. It started at the point of contact. A network of black, crackling lines spread across Takeda's shoulder, like fissures in dry earth. A low, crumbling sound filled the alley, the sound of stone grinding to powder. Takeda's scream was cut short as the decay raced up his neck and across his face. His skin, his flesh, his bones, they didn't rot or burn. They simply unraveled. They broke down at a molecular level, cascading into a fine gray dust. I watched, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing, as Dr. Akio Takeda, a living, breathing man, disintegrated. His terrified expression was the last thing to go, crumbling away into nothingness. The process took less than 3 seconds. Where a man had been kneeling, there was now only a pile of fine gray dust, mingling with the contents of his backpack on the wet ground. The only thing left was the faint, acrid smell of ozone and finality. Shigaraki stood there for a moment, looking down at the pile of dust with an expression of mild distaste, as if he'd just stepped in something unpleasant. He flexed his bare hand, then slowly pulled his glove back on. My paralysis finally broke. A wave of nausea and adrenaline surged through me. I stumbled backward, my shoulder hitting the brick wall with a dull thud. The sound, though small, was like a gunshot in the silent alley. Shigaraki's head snapped up. His gaze, burning with a red, malevolent light from behind the hand mask, locked directly onto my hiding spot. He saw me. "Oh?" he rasped, a slow, cruel smile creeping into his voice. "A spectator? Did you enjoy the show?" My mind went completely, blessedly blank. All the plans, all the analysis, all the fear, it all evaporated, replaced by a single, primal command: run. I turned and bolted. I ran with a speed I didn't know I possessed, my lungs screaming, my legs pumping on pure terror. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I could hear his footsteps behind me, not fast, but steady. A casual, unhurried pursuit. He was toying with me. I burst out of the far end of the alley into another narrow, deserted street. I risked a glance over my shoulder. He was standing at the mouth of the alley, a dark silhouette against the sickly yellow light, just watching me. He made no move to follow. He just raised a hand and gave a small, mocking wave. I didn't stop running. I ran until my lungs felt like they were on fire, until my legs were numb, until the city was a blur of smeared light and shadow. I put block after block between myself and that alley, that pile of dust, that grotesque wave. I finally collapsed against the side of my car, fumbling for my keys, my hands shaking so violently I could barely fit the key in the lock. I threw myself into the driver's seat and slammed the door, locking it, as if the thin sheet of metal and glass could protect me from a man who could turn people to dust. I sat there, hyperventilating, the image of Takeda's disintegration burned onto the inside of my eyelids. This wasn't a missing person case. This wasn't a corporate conspiracy. This was a horror story. I had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had looked back, scratched its neck, and asked if I was enjoying the show. The stakes hadn't just been raised. They had been launched into a blood-red orbit. This wasn't about saving a client anymore. It wasn't about exposing a corrupt company. It was about surviving a monster. I had followed the trail of breadcrumbs, and it had led me straight to the witch's oven. Shigaraki hadn't killed me. He'd let me go. Why? Was it arrogance? Did he see me as so insignificant, so quirkless and pathetic, that I wasn't even worth the effort of turning to dust? Or was it something worse? Was I part of the game now? A new NPC for him to play with? I finally managed to start the car, its engine roaring to life with a protesting cough. I had to get away. I had to warn Ochako. To hell with Todoroki's cold logic. The monster was out of its cage and it was actively hunting. There were no more rules. There was no more strategy. There was only the trail of dust, and the chilling certainty that it would lead to her next.